My healthy sweet potato casserole recipe elevates mashed sweet potatoes to the next level. Most traditional casserole recipes call for a ton of butter, a ton of sugar, and a ton of marshmallows. So honestly, the side dish is more like a dessert, not only in terms of sweetness, but also, unfortunately, in the number of calories. However, by roasting the sweet potatoes and bringing out their flavor and natural sweetness, I'm going to make a lighter, healthier version of this Thanksgiving classic. I started off with 6 pounds of fresh sweet potatoes. I washed them, I peeled them. When I peeled them, I cut them in half, and then I put the flat side down on a cutting board, and I just went around the edge with my knife. Then I went back and I cut the sweet potato into slices that were about 1/4 of an inch thick. Then I put them on a baking sheet, and for the 6 pounds, I used 2 tablespoons of butter. I rubbed both sides, and I baked the slices at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes, turning halfway through at the 15-minute mark. Even though that will take a bit of time, it's still really easy and simple. Although you definitely could roast the sweet potatoes with the skin on, my opinion is that I think you're going to bring out more of the flavor if you take the skin off and then roast them. Also, if you want to, you definitely could microwave them or boil them, something like that. But just like with butternut squash, I feel like baked sweet potato versus microwaved or boiled, it's almost like 2 different vegetables. The flavor is a lot more pronounced. So, especially in this healthy sweet potato casserole recipe that doesn't have all the sugar and butter and marshmallows, we're taking away flavor. So we need to add flavor by bringing out the natural flavors and the natural sweetness in the sweet potato. I know a lot of the traditional recipes have other ingredients like vanilla extract, cinnamon, nutmeg, things like that. Like I already said, a ton of butter and sugar. But I want this casserole to focus on the sweet potatoes and not be overly sweet, because I think, like I just said, the traditional recipe is more like a dessert. And I want this to be a little sweet, but for there to be no confusion that this is a side dish, not a dessert. So it's basically just going to be mashed sweet potatoes that are going to bake up light and airy. I am going to add 1 12-ounce or about 350 gram can of evaporated milk. I may add more, we'll see. As always, it's easier to add more later than to try to take away. 2 eggs to help it get nice and puffy. 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, and 2 tablespoons of white sugar. I know this is a healthy recipe, but in comparison to the normal recipe, I think 2 tablespoons of sugar, and some of them are 1/2 cup, 3/4, maybe 1 cup of sugar, that's nothing. If you want to use maple syrup or honey or something like that, you could, but I think white sugar is the most neutral, or one of the most neutral sweeteners. Honey has a taste, brown sugar has a taste to it, and like I said, I don't want to compete with the flavor of the sweet potatoes, so I think plain white sugar will make this sweet without adding a ton of extra flavors. I'm going to make this sweet potato casserole with pecans, but instead of mixing them in right now, I'm going to add them to the top later on. I'm going to do things a bit differently, so I'll walk you through the steps when we get to that point in the recipe. What I'm going to do now is I am going to just start to mash the sweet potato. My sweet potatoes are now mashed. Now, little by little, I'm adding the evaporated milk to work that in to get a nice, smooth puree. I had a feeling that I was going to need two 12-ounce cans of evaporated milk, and that's what I ended up needing. As you can see, I switched over to my handheld electric mixer because my immersion blender just wasn't big enough for the job. I tasted this and it already tastes absolutely amazing. Just this mashed sweet potato would be a great side dish all on its own. Now I'm going to add the pinch of salt and half of the sugar, 1 tablespoon, mix it in, try the puree, and see if I want to add all the sugar. I decided to add all 2 tablespoons of sugar, so now that the sugar is mixed in, I'm going to add the eggs. I saved the eggs until last so that I could try the sweet potato puree and decide if I wanted to add anything else. Now I'm going to add the eggs while preheating my oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. I just finished mixing in the eggs. Now I'm going to put the sweet potato puree into my casserole dish. I'm using a 9x13 dish. It's buttered. And now I'm literally just going to pour it in and then smooth it out. I just finished smoothing out the puree, so now my healthy sweet potato casserole is ready for the oven. Even though eventually this will more than likely have a pecan topping, I'm not going to put the pecans on now because I'm not quite sure how long this will bake. I'm guessing 375 uncovered for 45 minutes, but I'm not 100% sure. And since I'm not making a crumble with butter and sugar and things like that to help protect the pecans, shall we say, I don't want them to burn and turn bitter. So what I'm going to do is I am going to bake this, and then when it's done, really quickly I'm going to toast the pecans and put them on top. Since I'm not combining the nuts with butter or a lot of sugar, I'm still going to have that classic crunch from the pecans with just a fraction of the calories. I just pulled my sweet potato casserole out of the oven. It was in at 375 uncovered for 45 minutes. My casserole is out of the oven. Here it is right there. So now I'm going to toast my pecans. Here I have some pecan pieces, 1 3/4 of a cup, about 212 grams. I am going to just put them on this baking sheet. I'm going to start off with a cup, I think, and I am just going to spread them out like this. I turned down the oven to 350. It was on 375. I turned it down to 350, and I am going to toast these for 3 minutes. Then I'm going to take them out and stir. Then another 3 minutes, and I think that's going to be enough. My pecan pieces were in the oven for 3 minutes. Now I'm going to stir them and put them back in for another 3. I did want to point out that I am dry roasting the pecans. I did not pour any butter over them, no oil, nothing. This baking sheet is the baking sheet that I use to roast the sweet potatoes, so it does have some residual butter on it, but other than that, these are dry roasted. I just finished toasting the first batch of pecans. They were in at 3 minutes, then I brought them out and stirred them, then they were back in at 350 for 3.5 minutes. And while the second batch was in the oven, I put the toasted pecans on top of the casserole. The roasted pecans both looked and smelled absolutely incredible, so I couldn't wait to try the casserole. This healthy sweet potato casserole with pecans was absolutely delicious. Roasting the sweet potatoes really brought out their flavor, especially their natural sweetness. So I didn't have to add nearly as much sugar as the traditional recipe. Adding pecans was the perfect southern touch, and as with the sweet potatoes, roasting the pecans really brought out the flavor. I also really liked the contrast in textures between the smooth, mashed sweet potatoes and the crunchy pecan topping. Although the roasted sweet potatoes and pecans were definitely the reason why this was so good. I honestly think that the secret ingredient was the evaporated milk. Like I said earlier in the video, I tried the puree mixed with the evaporated milk and I was surprised by just how good it was. I think it was so good because both components in the puree were caramelized. The sugars in the sweet potato as well as the sugars in the evaporated milk. The sugars in the evaporated milk caramelizing slightly during the canning process. Although I definitely think that you could use regular milk in this, I think that the evaporated milk is probably the best option. However, if you wanted to make vegan sweet potato casserole, you could definitely use evaporated coconut milk and canola oil while roasting the sweet potatoes instead of butter. Although this was delicious as is, I think a bit of cinnamon or nutmeg or some orange zest or lemon zest would be good as well. Overall, I was really pleased with how this healthy sweet potato casserole with pecans recipe turned out. By roasting the sweet potatoes and the pecans, I was able to bring out the flavors without adding a lot of butter, sugar, or marshmallows, very significantly reducing the calories. This was still very delicious as well as sweet, but it was definitely a side dish. There is no mistaking this for a dessert. So if you're looking for a lighter, healthier version of a Southern classic, be sure to try this recipe. It would be perfect for Thanksgiving or Christmas. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.